Today's show is brought to you by Taos. Not another buzzword. Taos gets it. They don't just throw those around to make themselves sound smart. However, in reality, digital transformation and digital optimization are solving real challenges for today's leading enterprises. Experience the power and agility of Taos at taos.com. That's TAOS.com. Taos.com.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are rolling up on the last week here in June. We are almost halfway through the year. It's hard to believe. I know for a lot of people, 2020 has felt like it's lasted about 10 years, and I'm probably one of those. But we are definitely getting towards the end of June. We are definitely the weather is getting hot out there. So hope everybody's staying cool. Hope everybody's doing well. Let's get right to the news of the week. A couple of acquisitions this week in the news that sort of dominated the headlines. First off, a couple of acquisitions from Microsoft. So Microsoft and Azure in particular continue to build out in a couple of areas. The first one is Azure acquired ADRM, which does data models, and that was their way of sort of building out a number of additional data models to help boost their Azure Data Lake space. So, having more models available for those customers that are trying to build data lakes, trying to build BI and data warehousing and so forth. So an acquisition in that space for them. And then the second acquisition by Microsoft, so they are on a acquisition spree, at least the Azure space is, they acquired CyberX to improve IoT security. So this is the second acquisition they've made around the IoT space, made another one in April. This is really around sort of agentless security and looking at security threats, having high-level visibility for edge devices. So a couple of acquisitions in that space, both on the data side and the IoT side. So definitely beginning to expand out more and more for Azure in different areas. Third one is not so much an acquisition, but a new announcement. So we've covered HashiCorp for a long time. Our friends from HashiCorp, we've covered them for a long time. They launched the HashiCorp Cloud Platform. And I want to kind of clarify this because you think, okay, cloud platform, what does that mean? In essence, what they're doing is they are taking a lot of their technologies, so initially console in this case, and offering them as managed services. So instead of you just getting the software, installing it, running it yourself, they are now going to run a managed version of this. And this is part of a broader architecture that HashiCorp is rolling out, in which they're going to pull together eventually all of the technologies from HashiCorp. They will offer managed versions of those, and they will try and offer those across different clouds. So initially, this console offering is only available from AWS, but as Mitchell laid out in a long blog post that we'll link here, they have intentions to be able to do this as a multi-cloud capability. So very interesting to see that evolve. HashiCorp moving, like many companies, from a open source company to a commercial company to now one that is offering SaaS versions of their technology. So with that, we're going to wrap up Cloud News of the Week. A couple of acquisitions and a big launch from one of our friends here at HashiCorp. We'll put a couple of other things in there, some interesting articles about ways in which people are architecting Kubernetes, how they're choosing cluster sizes, and also a good lesson learned from some companies that have been doing service mesh and Istio. So a couple of other things in the show notes for Cloud News of the Week, so take a look at those. And with that, we're going to get to our interview for the week. I think you're going to like it. I know anytime we talk about serverless, everybody's ears seem to perk up. It's one of the topics that really gets people excited. So right after the break, we will dive into what's happening with enterprise serverless. Today's show is sponsored by Studio 3T. We all know MongoDB is easy. Now make it powerful. Studio 3T is the best IDE on the market to manage your MongoDB databases securely. They take customer feedback seriously, and their users have helped them build features like the nifty import-export wizard, which lets you run, automate, and schedule your import-export tasks easily. SQL, JSON, CVS, and MongoDump formats are supported, and you can export entire collections or views, current queries, current query results, and specific documents too. Studio 3T's SQL query feature is another great way to save time. Write SQL expressions and joins to query MongoDB and view your SQL queries equivalent code in multiple languages. If you're unfamiliar with MongoDB language, Studio 3T's Visual Query Builder offers a simple yet powerful drag and drop method to find what you need, fast. Get a free 30-day trial, no credit card needed, at studio3t.com/cloudcast. Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring service that provides comprehensive visibility into cloud, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments with over 350 integrations. Datadog unifies your metrics, logs, and distributed request traces in one platform so that you can investigate and troubleshoot issues across every layer of your stack. Use Datadog's rich, customizable dashboards and algorithmic alerts to ensure redundancy across multi-cloud deployments and monitor cloud migrations in real time. Try Datadog for yourself with a free trial, and you'll receive a complimentary t-shirt. That 14-day trial can be found just by going to datadog.com/cloudcast. That's datadog.com/cloudcast. And we're back. And folks, one of the things that we always love to get a chance to talk about, and we know that you love to tune in and listen to, is anything around serverless, around how developers are not only building applications more quickly, more efficiently, more agile, but also how serverless kind of takes away that need to worry about the underlying infrastructure, to worry about a lot of the underlying capacity planning details or some of the nuances. And so, we're always trying to dig into that topic more and more, but we're also trying to, kind of see where it's evolved. We've been covering it for the last few years, but really sometimes there's a good chance to see where it's evolved. So today, very excited to have Tim Zonca, who is CEO at Stackery. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be on it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So you've had a pretty diverse career. You've worked on a lot of different aspects of things that impact developers, impact development teams, whether it's tools or frameworks that they work with. Give folks a little bit of your background. It's good to get a sense of how much you've kind of understood the impact that the right tools have and things that can frustrate application developers.
I've spent, frankly, the entirety of my career in tech working with enterprise IT. And it started with security software. I've done collaboration software, agile software for developers. And over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, it's really been focused around the DevOps movement, kind of the modern software development lifecycle. So most recently, I was at Puppet, and Puppet really played a significant role in some of the, especially I think some of the early key parts of the DevOps movement, and in particular, infrastructure as code. And when we talk serverless, we're not going to be able to get away from talking about infrastructure as code, and we'll probably touch on that in a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, when I was at Puppet, I ran marketing and alliances for a while, and so really got a chance to work with some of the largest companies on the planet as they were going through their whatever they called it, their digital transformation or their DevOps transformations or whatever the kind of their journey to the cloud was. And so it's been really exciting to get a chance to now move to Stackery and really be on the forefront of the serverless movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had some folks from Puppet on in the past. They were always, like you said, very much kind of defining where that thing was going, whether it was DevOps, whether it was infrastructure as code, but ultimately it was, things that were going to automate and consistently, kind of drive how people could do things more efficiently, faster, and so forth. So very cool background. We're going to talk, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to kind of talk about serverless, this idea of, how do I build things faster? I looked the other day, it's been nearly 6 years, 5.5 years since AWS launched Lambda. Obviously that ecosystem's grown. We've seen, not only, Azure and Google and other things, but tons of other companies who have sort of built on that original concept of, it's a smaller form factor, don't worry about scaling. Where do you see, just at a real high level, where do you see serverless these days, both in terms of the technology's maturity, but also, as you get a chance to talk to a lot of companies, companies' maturity in adopting it, kind of both sides of it, the technology adoption, but also the culture adoption?
Yeah, I think touching on them in that order, I think on the technology front, we're at a fantastic point in time in that the technology, I think, has been, as you had mentioned, almost 6 years ago is when some of the, the first movements around this came out. And so regardless if it's Lambda, other functions, or frankly, even just I think what's become a really broad set of services, managed services from the cloud providers. Lambda is maybe at the heart of serverless for AWS, but they have dozens of managed services that people constitute into serverless applications. And so the library of really solid and proven technology can be seen as serverless, or these sets of managed services. I think it's not only has it matured, but it's matured and been proven enough that real companies are driving revenue, customer facing applications. They're doing it at scale. They're doing it within enterprise, really sophisticated contexts. And so I think it's a fantastic time for the technology. From an adoption perspective, my take is it's early, but not too early. And what I mean by that is, I think a couple years ago, it was still a pretty progressive move from an impactful adoption perspective. And so I think it was really a lot of the pioneers were paving the way there. Now what I see is most organizations that we talk to they already believe in serverless. Mm-hmm. And most of them actually have already been down the path for the last year and a half or so. And it might be only one team, it might be a few teams within the entire organization, but it's very rare nowadays for me to run into a customer or prospect where they're saying like, hey, what's this whole serverless thing? Should I be doing it or not? Most of them come to us saying, we've been doing this for a while. It's been, a year or so. We believe it's the way to go. It's harder than we thought it should be. And we've heard you could help us. So, help us progress this faster, help us scale it across more teams. But I think the technology is surely there. And I think the best practices in particular for this change in kind of operational paradigm is starting to take hold, and teams are working through that right now.
Yeah, I think that's good insight. It really aligns kind of with what I see, which is, the folks that have been doing this for a while have kind of pushed away all of the kind of the negativity or all of the things that confuse people, like, does it have servers, and, should I use this versus containers and all this other sort of noise. And they've just said, look, we've been trying it. We've been using it. It does what we want to do. It's simpler than we were dealing with before. Maybe it's not every application we have, but for the things we need, we're just going to double down on it. And so, yeah, I think what you're seeing in terms of people saying, hey, we do it, but hey, we'd love to do it a little bit better. That's the next big opportunity that's out there. Let's dig into that a little bit. So, when I look at Stackery and I look at the technology, and would love to kind of get your sense of what's under the covers. To me, it seems like it's a simplification of how I interact with it. It's a better visualization. It gives me a very broad picture of what's going on. What are the things that you try and do? As you talk about how do we make it easier to work with serverless or better? What are some of the things that Stackery is doing to make that easier?
Yeah, I think we run into a few challenges that are really common, and this is true if we have our customers that are rolling out a brand new application or set of applications. So it's kind of greenfield work. It's true if they're modernizing maybe more traditional monolithic applications. We see kind of a common set of challenges where I think we really help. The first is people are even if they've been doing serverless for a while, they're still trying to figure out, did they pick the right infrastructure as code framework?
Yep.
In order to use serverless at scale. So, even within AWS, you have SAM, you have CDK, you have Amplify, then you go outside of that, you have your serverless framework, things like that. And one of the common questions is, how do I know I'm doing this on the right one? And how do I know it's going to not only help me scale, but it's going to be there in the long term, that it's going to have enough development momentum behind it that I'll be able to hire people that understand it? And we help folks that are going through that, and I think make it really apparent what they're getting through these various frameworks, especially something like SAM, which is probably the most commonly adopted framework that we see in use. And so part of it is just basic insofar as understanding how that infrastructure's code framework could be applied to their architecture. So that's kind of one common challenge we run into. Another one is, as they're building an application that has various managed services, and meaning kind of as they're gluing together these services for their application. So it's Lambda, it's their APIs, their data layer, what have you. How do they know that they're getting them to work together in the right way? Are they locking them down appropriately? That's extremely common set of challenges that we help with as well. And then I would say another that we see is really more of a team dynamic, which is there may be a person that knows how to do this or a couple people on the team well, but how did they scale some of the verification and delivery practices across a team that's developing this new style of application. Those are, I think, a few of the most common challenges that I think we help people really streamline and make consistent across the organization.
Yeah, and I think those last 2 points that you highlight are really important. The second one being, it's not just the serverless pieces to the application, but how do I interact with the stuff that's quote unquote not serverless, whether it's a message queue or an API gateway or something else. Like being able to kind of get out of that silo in terms of going, oh, these tools do more than just one thing. They interact with the broader thing, which is the scope those application teams have. And then I think that the last thing that you said is incredibly important, which is, it's great that you have, one or two early developers that kind of get it, but the biggest impact is when they can spread that to teams and teams can start to put, kind of ways of working around it, policies or just best practices or whatever the right term is. But as you can spread those things to teams, and if the framework allows it to be more about teams than just an individual project or an individual application, it's got this sort of snowball effect that allows people to kind of come in and begin working with everybody else.
Yeah, and we definitely take a bias toward that team set of problems to solve. So as we build, and this has been true since the early days of Stackery, is we see that teams that are developing modern applications run into a sophisticated set of problems that we're just drawn to helping them solve. And I think you nailed some of that dynamic. And I think that's also then, because of that, it's a bias that we see. I mean, most of the customers and prospects that I talk with, it's because we're focused on helping them solve that kind of team set of dynamics.
Yeah. So, as you've been in this role now for almost a year, I suspect you spend a lot of your time talking to either existing customers, kind of prospect companies and so forth. At what point when you're having the conversation, does it stop? Are you talking in sort of the new way of what serverless is, which is like they're telling you, hey, we don't think about being burdened by, underlying infrastructure. We don't think about kind of capacity planning or, how big's the load balancer? Like, how has that shifted the conversations that you have with people? Or is that still kind of early days in terms of them really grasping how powerful some of these things are?
Actually, I think it's an interesting and timely question, at least for us, because a lot of those conversations, I noticed this earlier this year, is when a pretty significant shift happened, at least in like our prospective customers, in that those conversations around the value of serverless at a high level. And it's things like speed of delivery or updating the applications or agility of the team. It's around things like, cost, because the cost of managed services is so much more efficient than traditional infrastructure. It's around some of the securely delivering these applications in a modern way. Those conversations continue to resonate, but they resonated very well, I would say, kind of in the latter part of last year, and it was the conversation starter, and it took up the bulk of the conversations in our initial customer calls. What I found over the course of the first couple quarters of this year so far is those conversations, we quickly go past them. People are like, yeah, that's exactly why we're doing serverless. Like, now let's dive into exactly how we apply this in our organization. So it's been an interesting shift in that I think a lot of what I would call maybe like the business benefits of serverless, the cost reduction, the scale, the speed, that is much more assumed as a given, and we spend a lot less time, at least this year, going through how you deliver on that compared to last year. And it's a lot more time in saying, great, well, how do I specifically do that with my set of applications and for my team and the dynamics that we have in play? And frankly, it's been a blast because of that, because we really get to spend a lot more time and just more quickly diving into some of those dynamics that the teams have going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And especially, obviously, given kind of the environments we're all working in these days, people are, you start to strip things back to sort of like, what are the most important things we need to do? How do we most efficiently spend our time? I'm curious, as you're seeing that transition happen, did you find, and maybe it's not consistent, but like, did you find that it was the time when somebody said, hey, we built that application and it cost us like $17, and somebody went, oh my gosh, that's orders of magnitude less than the last prototype did? Or was it, we built this thing in some finite amount of time, or we were able to update it in a short period of time? Did it tend to be more sort of agility drove it, or lower cost, or was it some blending in between?
I think it's interesting because this is, people come to us because of agility or speed. Hey, we think this should be easier. We think we should be able to do this faster, but it's hard still. And they hear that we could help. But I would have to say, in almost every case, though cost isn't the reason that they come to us, cost and security tend to be what they then rely on us most for after they've implemented, where they quickly see those agility gains. And then there's the cost savings that they see as, I think, a pretty fantastic byproduct. So for example, we've had a handful of customers where they've moved applications to the cloud, not in a serverless way, but more of like a lift and a shift sort of way. And as they've done so, they've gained bursting and kind of the elasticity that you expect from the cloud, but they've gotten no faster. And in many cases, their costs go up because they're just running on someone else's servers.
Right.
And so they've gotten pushback then, or questions at least from their execs saying, hey, we thought this cloud thing was going to fix all this. And the response is like, well, we just took our stuff and moved it to someone else's server, so we get one of these three benefits, but not all of them. And so then they end up refactoring those applications into a set of serverless components, and that's where we've been able to help them. So they get that agility, and what they see then is typically an order of magnitude. Usually, it's about 90% less cost than to run that application when they break it apart.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily the reason that they start. They just think it should be easier or faster, but it's always a byproduct that tends to then be the one that they want to talk about when they say, hey, can we do a case study with you? Or can, when they're doing a talk or something, it seems like it's the reason that they go down this path, but we always find it tends to be secondary.
Yeah. So come for the agility, stay for the sweet budget.
Yeah. And I think that's one of those things is especially me from a CEO perspective, thinking about go-to-market, there's the reasons people buy, and then the actual benefit that they get when they put it into production, and being mindful of the difference of the two of those.
Right. So, obviously we've been talking a little bit about kind of the shiny things that people love. You've been around, how things have gotten built over time. Like, how much, as you talk to people that are implementing these new ways, whether it's a new application, something modernized, like how much stuff do they, in the way they do it is still there? I mean, how much is it? You're still obviously writing code, you're doing tests. There's CI pipelines, and so, how much do they go, oh, okay, there's certain muscles that I have to have, and then. Are you finding any consistent like aha moment where they go, oh, but I don't have to do this anymore, whatever this is?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I hear in that question. I think the first thing is you're right in that many of the processes have the same names, but the implementation is really different. When you're working with serverless, kind of serverless applications. Meaning you're still doing verification and testing and CI/CD and things like that. But what we found is that a lot of the first gen DevOps tools aren't built with a serverless approach in mind. And so we see a lot of customers that have been really hesitant to go too far in using some of those tools to automate what have become pretty common practices. Okay. Probably the most common that we see are things like Circle or Jenkins or whatever their CI/CD system is. They're like, hey, look, we realize it does this, but it wasn't born for it. And so there's all these sorts of weird workarounds we're going to have to build. And so that's one of the big reasons people have been coming to us. We have that set of capabilities just built in a serverless way. So for example, we're working with a large financial institution currently using Team Foundation Server from Microsoft to deliver their serverless applications. And it's just become so cumbersome for them. And so to try and summarize why, it's because it wasn't built with a serverless implementation in mind. Yeah. And so they've had to really kind of build in a strange way around the edges here. And so they're almost done with their proof of concept saying, hey, look, this Stackery just built this from the ground up to treat all of this kind of the serverless approach as a first class way of doing things, and to get ready to move off of that. So I think that's one of the things that we've seen, is that the same terms, the same processes or practices, but the implementation is significantly different enough that it's causing some people some road bumps as they try and figure out how to move forward there. I think, to me, though, the biggest thing is really more of a practice or a people approach, in that the biggest wave over the course of the last few years in the cloud native world has really been around kind of containerized environments. I mean, that topic has really just sucked the oxygen out of the room for quite a while now. And I think one of the reasons it's taken hold so well is there's been a bit more of a top-down mandate from CIOs saying, like, hey, go figure out our container strategy versus go figure out our serverless or some other kind of cloud native strategy. And I think the other is it maps really well to the way that dev and ops teams have been working for decades now. There is still underlying infrastructure. It just might be way more modern and way more fun to talk about, but a Kubernetes-based infrastructure, it still has operators. They might not be called sysadmins anymore, but there are people doing those operational tasks of building, provisioning, and maintaining that operational infrastructure. And so it maps to a more traditional dev and ops model. What we see as the biggest shift for teams isn't the technology necessarily, but it's this notion that the people building the applications are the same ones delivering and the same ones running it. And that the idea of infrastructure as code, which is a best practice in a Gen 1 DevOps environment where the dev and ops teams are separate. But in serverless, it's required. You have to do it. There's no way around it.
Right.
And so that's a big paradigm shift for teams where it's the same group of people actually building and running their own stuff and treating their infrastructure as code. To me, that's, I think, the biggest shift that we see people go through and help them through.
Interesting. Yeah. And it makes a ton of sense on a couple levels. One, you're only going to be as fast as sort of your slowest link, weakest link type of thing. So it makes sense that they'll get started, things will be going okay, and then they'll realize, hey, this one thing is still a bottleneck. Oh, wait, it's still kind of an old architectural model. It also makes sense as to why we're seeing more of other components kind of become serverless, if you will. So we'll talk about like data, serverless databases and other things. They're leveraging the same underlying concepts of like, don't worry so much about how the underlying infrastructure works, automate it, but kind of get it out of the picture. Don't make it a separate team, just to sort of do it. So those things make a ton of sense. I want to wrap up with one last question, and this has been kind of fascinating to get your insights on this. You've obviously, through the past work that you've done, sort of seen these DevOps journeys, these DevOps transformations. Do you see any parallels as people go through sort of a serverless transformation in terms of, whether it's they do technology first and then they change culture? Are there any sort of like culture and process steps you've seen more consistently now as people are going through these serverless journeys?
I see some similar process, maybe like, either steps or improvement or what have you. But to me, the thing that this question instantly pops in my brain is frankly just the joy and excitement that I see from teams. That is, it's refreshing and it's new. Mm-hmm. Meaning, I think when in a bit more of a Gen 1 kind of DevOps transformation, it's really, I think, a complex kind of people and practices set of problems, because you still ultimately have at least two teams. Your DevOps, security usually is trying to figure out their role in that as well. What we see is people adopt serverless is just this realization that like, wow, we actually can do this all. We can build, ship, and then run our own applications. And it seems to have this tremendously like freeing and kind of joyful expression. And day in and day out, those are the teams we get to work with. And so there are these cloud, they're the cloud teams, they're the innovation teams, and no longer are they operating in the shadows. Like, they're not shadow IT anymore. They're blessed projects and blessed groups, and they're seeing their success really quickly. And to see that empowerment and their excitement in getting these applications out the door in record time is just awesome to be able to be a part of on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's very cool. Because you're right. We've been covering sort of the DevOps thing for a long time, and there is there is a certain amount of excitement people have. Hey, we're automating things that we never did before. But then there's also, a good amount of gunk that people go through, and that they're having to, try and convince people like, hey, you should be putting things in source control, and you should be. Whereas, like you said, once these teams have kind of broken away from being shadow IT, they're approved projects. Their goal is to go fast, build things more efficiently. You've taken away a lot of that friction, and that is the kind of the overwhelming thing we hear over and over again from those serverless teams that just said, this is just a better way of doing it. It's a more efficient way of doing it. So it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Tim, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say our most recent customer is a great example of that, where they're launching. It's a large global financial services institution, and they're launching their first customer-facing SaaS and cloud app, using Stackery, and the team is just thrilled because they're like, look, like we're setting a new bar within the organization, and it's cool to be able to work with teams who are making that big of a change in their companies. Yeah,
that's very cool, and it's very cool to see when it's it's not just hey, our customer is a Silicon Valley startup. It's breaking into the financial services industry is challenging. So it's good to see them adopting things as well. Tim, with that, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time. If folks want to reach out either to the Stackery team or to yourself, what's a good way for folks to kind of get in touch these days?
Well, of course, Stackery.io, our site is where you can sign up for free for our product and stuff. But if you listen, you have any questions, you want to reach out to me, I'm Tim at Stackery.io. So just drop me a line. And if I can't get your question answered, I'll make sure I track down someone who can on our team, and look forward to talking with you. Thanks, Brian, for having me. It's been a really good chance to get a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. And folks, with that, for Aaron and myself, I want to thank Tim for his time today. As always, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.